All right. Welcome to episode 59 of the Jake Blanchard podcast. Before we dive in, just real quick, podcast is partially brought to you by Stream to See. That's STREAM, the number two, in C.com. They make sunscreen and personal care products. They're recently featured as the number one all natural sunscreen on the market by Rolling Stone magazine. Check them out when you go to streamtosee.com. Use the code JBP at checkout. That'll get you 10% off your order. Also, giving some love to the good people over at Fellowship Brand. They make premium men's grooming products. Take care of your beard. Take care of your tattoos if you've got them. Join the Fellowship. Go to fellowshipbrand.com. Use the code JBP. That'll get you 10% off. My guest today is Ben Killoy. He is a U.S. Marine veteran. He's a speaker. He's a coach. He's a fellow podcaster. He's been very vocal about his transition that he and most veterans go through. He's worked through feelings of redefining identity, rediscovering passion and purpose in his life. He's dedicated his time to mastering principles in leadership and helping others understand who they are and overcome adversity. He combines, his passion for helping others live their best life with the deep insights and the lenses that he's acquired from the military. And as a father, he hosts the Military Dad podcast, as well as the Business of Fatherhood podcast. He's a stay-at-home dad. He's a coach. And I'm so excited to have him on the podcast today to explore all these topics and more. Ben, welcome. What's going on, man?
I am so excited to be here this morning. It's great time to start doing a podcast in the morning because your energy is high. You're excited for the day, and it just sets a great tone for the rest of the day. No matter what happens, you've created something that's going to make a difference in the world. So thank you for letting me come on the podcast.
For sure, Ben, man. And hey, another thank you here. Thank you for your service. We need to hear that more and more these days. Clearly, we're pretty close to 4th of July. I've had some time to reflect prior to you coming on. So I just wanted to say that before we dived in.
I appreciate that, Jake.
Hey, man, where are you joining me from today? Like, what part of the country are you living in, Ben?
I am living pretty much under a rock. So most of the time, I'll start with the joke first, that most times people talk about something and I have no idea what they're talking about, whether it be a Hollywood reference or any pop culture reference or anything. And I'm like, yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about. My wife gets confused by it all the time. And she's like, how do you not know this? And I'm like, I lived under a rock because I grew up on a farm here in southern Wisconsin. And I live about 30 minutes still from that farm. I just got done unloading some hay this week with my dad, so still active on that farm. And growing up on that farm, I didn't get exposed to a lot of the world. For me, joining the military was kind of like this whole out-of-world experience. The only time I left the state of Wisconsin was on some small vacations we did as a family. But the idea that a small farm boy from Wisconsin would be stationed in Okinawa and go to all these different places was not something that I set myself up for in high school or even thought I was capable of doing.
So that so was that the primary driver for you to go into the military? Was seeking some kind of experience in the world or some kind of hunger to go out and see more, or was there more?
Absolutely not, because one, I was never told to be hungry. I was never told to be eager. I was always it was just kind of like, this is what life's supposed to be. On a farm is very routine, repetitive, and it's very cyclic in nature. And so there's not a lot of discovery. It's the same thing every year. You do the work, you do the process, and you reap the rewards at the end of the year. So I didn't really even have that kind of mindset. And for me, I was really just trying to do what everybody else did, figure out where you're supposed to go to college. And I was like, I'm not really finding the right college. I didn't feel where I was like, this is where it was going to be. And I really just wanted computers. That was like the primary thing. That was going to be the thing that I was going to do with my life when you have to pick that one thing you want to do when you grow up. And so I started looking at the military. Now, a lot of the military that I looked at, I was like, I don't really want to do any of that other stuff. I just want computers. And so the Air Force is very computerized. And I was like, well, this makes sense. It's easy. They can get me trained on it. Why not? So I talked to the Air Force recruiter, probably was a few weeks away from raising my right hand to join the Air Force. But the day that changed my life was August of 2002 when the Marine recruiter had a bouncy house at our church picnic. And now the Marines were definitely way on my list of people I did not talk to. I'm like, I have no desire to be a grunt. And I was so ignorant, I just thought the Marines were infantry only. I had no idea that there was either flavors of jobs within the Marine Corps. I quickly find out they're not. But it's not even me that goes up to him and have the courage to talk to him. My mom is worried that I'm not exploring all my options. I'm making a rash choice by just going into the Air Force. So somehow she thought it was a good idea to go talk to the Marine recruiter. And next thing you know, I'm talking to the Marine recruiter. And then in high school, a few days later, I'm talking to him again. He's talking to me about what's going on. Yep, the Marine Corps has got computers too. And little did I know, 2 weeks later, I was raising my right hand for the Marine Corps. And almost what I call my dare to be great moment, because I would have been voted least likely to join the Marine Corps. I could barely run a mile. I could barely do a pull up. And it was almost like, this sounds like the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Why not? And it was almost like I was too scared to say no, but that also created the courage to say yes as well to something that I really had no idea where I was going to go.
Man, that's a lot there. I think the first thing I'm cueing into, usually it's the other way around. Usually someone's like, I'm going into the Marines, and their mom's trying to say, no.
Exactly. And this is the opposite. I don't know whether she fully regrets it or not, but it was her that went up to talk to that Marine recruiter, because I was like, he's intimidating. But what I didn't know is he was a top recruiter in Wisconsin 3 years in a row. So the odds were stacked against me from the moment I said hello. But ultimately, that kind of just opened me up to a whole new avenue and really started to reveal more of who I was on the inside, because I had no depth to myself and understanding what I could do or where anything would go in life. I just was following the path that everybody else was doing and trying to find my own way. I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. I didn't feel accepted. I didn't have a lot of friends in high school. So I always kind of felt like the odd man out. And something about the Marine Corps, the identity, the whole persona of it, kind of like being together, being connected to something, like that really enchanted me. That was something I've never really felt before. And I was also, I only have two sisters, so I was the only brother as well, or only child with a boy. So I didn't have a lot of like just brothers in my life too. So something about that also probably enchanted me to like, I think this is what I want.
And what was it about technology growing up that one, interested you, and then two, why specifically the military to try to express that excitement and that potential career path?
I don't exactly know why computers growing up, but I know when we first got our computer, I was hooked on it. And so my dad was growing in his life, he was hooked on farming. But the moment we first got our computer, I was hooked on trying to figure it out, figure out all the different programs, trying to figure out all the things it could do. Back when like Windows 95 came out, there wasn't a lot you could do. I remember getting American Online for the first time. And there was just something about it that I kept wanting to figure out. And so probably the first thing that kind of came through all that is I liked solving problems, and computers became a great tool to solve a problem. I remember even when I was an FFA in high school, I learned how to do some really cool things in Excel to manage some different stuff that we were doing using big things with formulas that most people within corporate world are getting their back padded for figuring out that I was figuring out in high school. Yeah. So there's probably just a lot of that problem solving. And within the military, I would add that a lot of that would come from probably, I would just say, like, when people can't figure out college, they almost default like, okay, maybe the military is the place where I can go to figure it out. So it was almost kind of like a default. Like, that's where I felt like, okay, people try the college route. If they don't feel like they're going to go there. Like, there was just the military route is your backup. And I had no lineage of military that I was following. There's no Marine Corps lineage in my family. And so I was kind of like going out on my own. A lot of people thought I was nuts in my family, but something about it like just seemed right. And especially when the Marine Corps part component added, like it just felt like I was going to something bigger than myself.
Well, and I'm interested as well of like the mindset of saying, well, hey, I need to go figure out, or maybe this was expressed kind of naturally, but I need to go figure out who I am. And then going into like the most structured regimented, they're going to tell you what to eat. They're going to tell you when to sit. They're going to tell you what to do. Like, how did you find yourself along the way within the structure of being in the Marines?
Absolutely lost. So not being accepted, never really letting myself be seen in high school turned into kind of as a recipe for disaster within the Marine Corps. So a K is the last name. Killoy is my last name. So I was in the back of the squad bay because the squad bay gets split up alphabetical order, and the K's are in the back. So I was already naturally kind of hidden from the drill instructors who would kind of almost focus on the front. They would run to the back, but it was a lot less times they'd run to the back. And I would almost like try to hide within that experience because that's how I survived in high school, not being seen and not being noticed. And there was also still just as many bullies that joined the Marine Corps that still came with their massive egos, that still came with their chip on their shoulder, that really kind of thought the whole process of boot camp was easy because of how hard their life growing up was. I didn't have a hard life growing up. I mean, I knew what hard work was, but I didn't have like an emotional experience from abuse or trauma. And so, like, mentally, I really didn't have a lot of toughness. And it kind of came to head when in San Diego is where I went to boot camp. We go up north to Camp Pendleton for field week, which is 4 weeks. And there was a moment where it was all just kind of building up, this hiding and the emotions that I wasn't processing. And it all kind of came to a head. We were doing a drill exercise outside, getting ready to eat our MREs. And I just started crying because, like, the pressure was building up. And in that moment, I learned something that I didn't fully understand until many years later. But people didn't get pushed away from me because I started crying in boot camp. They actually came closer. Like, the squad leaders came in. They made sure that we had a fallen Marine that wasn't being taken care of. And they made sure that I felt connected and that I was being understood and that they could figure out how to help bring me back to part of the platoon. And that kind of moment of vulnerability kind of really taught me that most people know if you dive into vulnerability, that it's not something that pushes people away. It becomes magnetic. And that was kind of like what that Marine Corps experience taught me. Like, I wasn't mentally tough before that. I opened up because I had this struggle. And then I learned that people come together. But that, again, I didn't fully understand what happened. And I also probably didn't fully apply the lesson properly in the remaining years that I was in the Marine Corps. But man, when I look back on that moment, I mean, that's what brotherhood is now in the modern world of, like, when a man is struggling, he opens up, your brothers come in around you and help support you in that moment. And that's exactly what the Marines did within my platoon. So I learned an important lesson that I didn't often figure out until later in life.
So then you did, how many, 4 years?
4 years.
Or 4 years in the Marines. And then you came out. How was coming out of the service? And, what was that experience like going back into being a civilian? And then what was your career path that you chose from there?
So I served all my time in Okinawa. So they had a 2-year mandatory tour, and then I extended for my 3rd year. So I had a tropical island where I spent. I didn't do any of the time in sandboxes in Iraq or Afghanistan. But over there, I really got exposed to this idea of the world being much bigger. I mean, unless you've traveled internationally, you kind of just get stuck in your own Americanism and your own bubble. But once you've seen the world, how people live, what people like, how people find happiness, and if people have nothing that have joy, all of those things kind of shaped me. And for me, when I got out, I still wasn't really good at the fitness component. I still really wasn't good at the firing component of shooting a rifle. And so I really wasn't getting promoted as fast as I wanted. And so I was like, I feel like the Marine Corps is going to hold me back because it's not measuring me in the way that I really am effective. I was really good intellectually. I could lead Marines. I could do these different things. But in the way the Marine Corps measured me, I wasn't really good. So I got out with a simple idea. I was meant for something bigger. I had no idea what that was. I had no idea what self-growth was, self-help. All of that was still a figment of my imagination that I didn't even think about. But I knew whatever it was, the Marine Corps is going to hold me back. And so, but the problem was I just adopted what the Marine Corps told me to do on the other side is take the skills you've learned in the military, apply them on the outside, get a job, apply your GI Bill, and there's supposed to be unicorns and rainbows show up as you achieve your American dream. But as I started to do that, I got a job at a generator manufacturer, and I just dived into, because I was a generator mechanic in the Marine Corps, so that thread made perfect sense. And I went to school. I went for school to electrical engineering, but it all kind of came ahead. My daughter was 2-year-old at the time. My son was just born in 2014. And it all came to a head where I had to drop out of the College of Engineering because I had failed 2 classes. And I'm like, I've got to reboot here. And essentially what I felt like, I had a house, I had everything that everybody should have, but I wasn't happy. And I was like, this isn't the dream, this is hell. And I had really had to dive into like what was going wrong. But the problem was they told you when you get this piece of paper, everything's supposed to get better. We even tell high school students, go off into college and get this piece of paper, and that's where you're going to be able to find this gateway. It's your golden ticket to go to where you want. But I was like, so now if I dropped out, like there's no golden ticket. Like now the grass just dried up on the other side. That was supposed to fix everything. And I was on out of a pit for about 6 months. And I went to a silly class on making the transition from staff to supervisor at work. And this guy was talking about leadership, and I kept raising my hand. And I was like, I know all these answers. And it wasn't like complicated leadership stuff. It was very basic stuff, but it was stuff I learned in the Marine Corps. But the problem was the civilian world doesn't trust you to run a copier. So you just kind of turn that component off. Like you're not ready to use what you're capable of using in the Marine Corps yet in the civilian world. And I just forgot it for those 10 years. And so then once I started reactivating that, that's what kind of led me down this journey of figuring out leadership and figuring out who I am, figuring out what I'm good at, and figuring out where I can go in life. And that kind of led me to where I have now, the 2 podcasts and helping dads. But it all started from rediscovering that love of leadership in 2014.
So in 2014, you're sitting in like a staff meeting. Is that what I'm hearing? Like you're sitting in a staff meeting and then it just, the switch comes back on and you're saying, oh yeah, like I do have a baseline skill set in this. I'm hungry now to pursue additional information around it. Like where did you go to get unstuck here?
I don't remember the exact component, but I remember just like the first self-help guy I found was Zig Ziglar. And I was like, who is this guy? And then I found out he's passed away. So it's already a little bit too late to like ever go meet him or anything. But I'm like, because the information that he was talking about was like, just like right there. I was like, this guy's speaking my language. I just didn't know how to speak it. And there was a quote that he said that really resonated and became kind of like my operating system for a good 3 years. That you are where you are and who you are because of what has gone into your mind. And you can change who you are and where you are by changing what goes into your mind. So I just started consuming books. I started consuming a bunch of leadership books from Zig and John Maxwell and anybody else that would recommend a book. I was reading it. But the problem is, and I'm sure you run into it as well within the work you do, that knowledge doesn't automatically fix the problem. People know a lot of stuff in 2021. It's applying it that they really struggle with. And so I also learned in this process that if I really mastered these principles of leadership and how to apply them, like that would be a skill worthwhile that nobody could really touch because like people can learn new skills all the time, but to master real leadership skills and be able to craft a team, that really enchanted me. And so that's really kind of what sparked that journey. And it really just came from a bunch of knowledge, but then I had to start applying it. So that was like about 2017, I started applying it and figuring out, okay, I got to start doing something with this because I just had like analysis paralysis, essentially. Had all these ideas. I would have like 10 ideas a day of like, oh, that would be a good idea. That would be a good idea. But how do you pick the right one? And essentially, I did some coaching work that they helped me understand that like the season you're in as a dad right now, focus on that. And so then I started creating something from that idea and just kind of kept going that like, this is my dad season. I'm going to focus on leadership within my dad season. I can do other things with leadership later on. But right now, my kids are young. They're all under 10. This is the season that mattered most. And so I focused on this season that I'm in now.
Yeah. And let's talk about fatherhood, my man. Like that's like obviously you're gravitating or you're building around that, helping military fathers, really focusing in on fatherhood. Where did that, I mean, obviously when you have kids, it's the most important thing in your life, but like you are outwardly gathering knowledge, distilling knowledge, reflecting on what it means to you and helping others, coach them through, that experience, especially from a military lens. Take me through that trajectory, maybe a little more in detail.
I'll take you to the genesis because the genesis is kind of baked into the whole story as well. That when Jay Leno left the Tonight Show for the last time, all these people came out to thank him and show gratitude for him giving him a chance because giving him a chance on the stage to tell their jokes launched their comedian career. And there were so many people that had gratitude for what Jay did in their life. I had this feeling, I'm like, I don't think there's going to be a single person that's going to care that I was here. Other than my family, my time on earth is just going to be dust. There's going to be no lasting impact. And it was a really dark moment. And it was about when I call it my midlife crisis when I turned 30. And so I really had to start figuring out, like, what do I do? And I was also looking at my daughter who was 2 years old at the time and being like, how can I lead you into your life if I can't even lead myself through mine? So I was kind of like that crutch, like things weren't working. I had this pit in my stomach of what I really wasn't even understanding what it was. I just knew I was stuck. I didn't like where I was. And I had to figure out something to do differently. And the powerful question that I kind of used to help me get to where I am, or really get that first step, was if you want a result in your life you never had, then you need to start doing things that you've never done. I was like, that's a powerful question. Let me look at that one. So I was like, what have I never had? Well, I've never really had good friends. I've never had people that like reached out to me, that cared that I was here, that was mutually worried about each other's lives. And I was like, well, why is that? And I was like, well, you don't really talk to people. And I'm like, okay, why don't I talk to people? Well, every person is like that high school girl that said no. And that really sucked, that rejection. So you've just applied that rejection to everybody. And I was like, well, that's a crazy thought. Like, why would I logically assume that? But I didn't really even know I was doing it. It was just subconsciously happening. So I was always at the park in our subdivision, and there was always dads there. And I was like, I want to talk to you, but I don't have the courage yet. And then one day I was like, screw it. I'm just going to say hello. The worst that can happen is they keep going. And it turns out we were both just playing chicken. We both always wanted to say hello. Just none of us had the courage to start that conversation. We both just assumed we wanted to play with our kids and not have a conversation. And it was the third dad at the park that I met was a veteran. I was like, wow, did that just work? I just met a brand new veteran that lives down the road. And what I learned in those conversations is they started reflecting back the value that I couldn't see because of the darkness I was in. I was in the not enough darkness, that just kind of feeling like nothing I do is going to be good enough. Why even try? But when you start speaking and you start having those conversations, they start saying things that, like, the way you say things isn't something that most people do. And you helped me feel something that I didn't really know I could have. And I just started kind of repeating that and then getting hooked on that conversation. And that really helped get me to where I am today, because those conversations revealed the best parts of me that I didn't fully understand. You recently had Larry Hagner on the podcast, and a great story, an odd story that to admit on the podcast, is he had a Dad's Edge Summit in 2017, first physical summit he ever had. And it was a bunch of dads that I had never met, only met online. And we all go to St. Louis for this summit. It was about 60 of us. Going in there, I've never been a hugger, so I'm going in there as a handshaker. I have an idea that they're going to upgrade to hugging, but I am definitely not the guy that leads with it.
Did you just say upgrade to hugging?
Yeah, I knew like they were just going to go for it, but I was like, I'm not going to be that guy. I've never been a hugger my entire life. Nobody in my family is a hugger. But somehow, through the strange way of events of reflecting like I'm talking about, I came out of that 2-day summit as the guy that gave the best hugs. And so even to this day, it's something as like a signature. I'm disappointing people if I don't give them a good hug. But I never knew that about myself until I went into the summit with a bunch of random guys, and they reflected back this piece that I had no visibility on. I just knew I was not it. But that's a good example where I wasn't really acknowledging it. And once I did, that just helped me become more of who I am. And like the whole idea of who I am, a Marine who talks about his emotions, talks about hugging people, like talking about these things on a podcast openly is like this walking, talking oxymoron. But that's essentially me figuring out my voice and my story. And now I've taken what I've done through military dads, helping them come home. And now I've realized that like that word home is kind of like my big thesis. What I was missing when I turned 30 was that feeling of home on the inside, that I knew who I was. I knew how to be who I was. And now I realize that like a lot of dads, not just military dads, struggle to come home emotionally from war. We all struggle to come home from work. And so now I've taken my coaching and applied that same principle of home to many dads that struggle to not just be defined by what they do, but get to figure out who they are and be that version, because that's what your family needs. They don't need your paycheck. They need for you to be who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we continue to pull this thread on fatherhood, I mentioned in the introduction that one of your roles is, outside of coaching, outside the podcast, and some of the other things that you're doing, is you stay home with your kids. And certainly this is becoming a more common place in society. Maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, it really wasn't. I've got a friend of mine, his name's Scott. Shout out to Scott if you're listening. I know he listens to the podcast every now and then. His wife's a physician over in Oregon, and he never imagined himself staying at home with his children as the primary person who's at home. And I'd love to get your perspective on that journey, or that stigma or ego or anything around that. Like, what was that like, making that decision? And what was that like, gravitating toward being at home and then taking that opportunity to build businesses around the things that you're clearly passionate about?
So it really wasn't even something on my radar. I didn't even know stay-at-home dads existed, I would say, back in like 2019. And it started really with this first idea. I was like, I put a bird in my wife's ear. I was like, hey, why don't you go on spring break with your teacher friends down in Florida for something, just get away. And she's like, that's a great idea. They jumped on it, went away for 4 days. But it was on me. I was like, this is the first time I've ever been a dad on my own. I'm like, this is going to be interesting. But it was over the weekend. It wasn't too bad. It was spring break. I survived. But then come around May in 2019, my wife comes home and says, I've been invited to go to China for our school district. They're doing an exchange program. Like 10 teachers will go over to China and see how the Chinese teach their kids. And I would like to go. It's 10 days. And I was like, well, first instinct, I was like, well, I want to be a supportive husband, so you got to say yes. So I did. And then I started putting the pieces together, and I'm like, wait, that's 10 days. That's me. I just did 4 days in spring break, but that was it. Like the 10 days, that's a real deal. And so I took vacation from work. That was my insurance policy that I was going to make it. I was like, if I have to balance both, I'm not going to make it. And so I went all in on that fatherhood idea for those 10 days. And she left on a Friday. It was between Friday and Wednesday. We're a hot mess. I woke up with a hangover every morning, and I wasn't even drinking. It was exhaustion. And it was really hard. I was blogging about it every night. Moms and everybody was getting a good joke at my expense when I would tell them about the stories, but I would tell them about the wins and the bad parts and the hard parts. But by the end of that 10-day journey, I felt like I had found my rhythm and found my stride. And I really got connected to just being there, like creating some adventures. We ordered a pile of dirt. So we were doing some landscaping. The kids loved that whole aspect of it. And it was just a pile of dirt. And I was really tapping into this deeper version of myself. And the problem was when I went back to work, I had like a dad hangover because I was like, I just want those 10 days back. Like nothing here that I'm doing really matters anymore. Like doing work that's just like, especially if you're not really juiced up in your job, like if you're just doing the routine to provide, once you get connected to that dad mode, like to me, that was like, I just want that dad mode back. Like nothing here. And so that continued on from then the June of that year to right up until January of 2020, when I went into work one day and by 9 a.m., my job was eliminated in a corporate reorg. And so I'd wanted that stay-at-home dad role, but I was still the provider. So like, how do you like? It wasn't possible for me to even perceive it. So then when you lose your job, like everything becomes possible. And so I was talking to a lot of different people. I was talking to people who have jobs. I was talking to people who are entrepreneurs, and a lot of them encouraged me. That was like, I think you could do your professional speaking goal within this time frame that you've got and be able to do something with it. Now, this was before Corona hit, so I had the courage to go through it, and I was like, I think I can do it as well. So I went all in on that. My daughter and I were balancing different things back out. The kids were getting in the bus. And one moment I want to pause towards, it was September like 1st or 2nd of that, after losing my job, the kids got on the bus. And I'd always wanted to get the kids in the bus and be there when they got off. And I felt like a winner already, even before I even knew what was going to happen, even before anything else happened. Being there in that moment and giving them a hug before they got on the bus, something that I had never been able to do because of the time constraint, really felt powerful. And I was like, I've already won. No matter what happens in the future, I've already won. And so then when Corona hit, I had to kind of figure it out again. And then my wife's a kindergarten teacher, so her world's been also chaotic through the entire time. So it just made more sense for me to try to figure something out, as well as keeping the kids. And when the school went on lockdown or anything else happened or kids had to quarantine, I was still the guy that kind of helped balance it so she could focus on her job because it was still chaotic in her world as well. And it just felt natural to fall into it. But man, it was hard. And there were days that felt like Groundhog's Day. But I know what I remember most is the memories. I don't remember the bad days. I remember the good days. And it's kind of like the concept where you have your first kid, those first like 6 months are hell, and your kid grows up, and then you have that conversation with life. Let's do that again. Let's have another one. And then another one comes out, and you're like, what the hell were we thinking?
Oh, I
you
had
just
that
forget
conversation.
all
Absolutely.
the hard times.
100%.
And you're like, how did we think this was a good idea type thought? That's essentially what I've learned with stay-at-home dad. Like, you're going to have hard days. There are going to be days where your emotions are just spent. But the problem and the part that I've learned is those feelings are temporary, but the memories are forever. When I look at my phone, I don't see any of the hard times. I just see us sledding in the winter because all the kids were locked down during winter, and we would go sledding after school got done every day. Like, that's going to be a memory I take on with my life forever. And after losing my job, like a principle that I've tried to live by now is I'm done trading time and money for memories with my kids, because I gave that transaction 8 years and it was just gone. And I'm like, it taught me a lot. But again, that transaction, like those memories, like the dad guilt was real on the other side of losing my job. And even now, a year and a half later, it's still something that's hard. But the stay-at-home dad journey is one where even you said it when I first told you, you're like, yeah, that's not me. That's usually the initial reaction. But what I've learned with being a stay-at-home dad is the role is different and the purpose is different. And most of the time, we as men get caught up in identifying with our job and our titles and our salary and what we can do and what we can build. But when you switch that mode to what you can build within a child, and when you think of the role of a dad within a kid's life, like you have an amazing ability to help your kids be guided into a life that's they don't even know yet. And you can help expand their curiosity in a really cool way because you're your dad, you're a superpower within your kids' lives. And it's the hardest thing, but it will be the best thing that I've ever done. And 2020 was my best dad year yet for everything that's happened and everything that's future happens. Hopefully, many more dad years. And I hopefully, after all the things we went through, they remember 2020, not for wearing masks all the time, but they remember in the future that 2020 was the year that dad came home.
Wow.
And that this was the year that dad really started guiding us into the future. And that they remembered that this is where dad helped us become who we are today.
That's an awesome perspective, man. And, it's funny as I'm sitting here reflecting as you're talking, and certainly you and I had a conversation, like, I don't think that I'm, at least at this point in my life, that switch of like, I I need to be home all the like I'm home. I've been home for the last almost 2 years now, with COVID and with my consulting firm and whatnot. So I've been working from the house, and I've got some French doors outside my office here, and I can see what's going on in the house. Like I can see them kind of living their lives and putting laundry baskets on their head and spilling things and all that. Out, in general, pop is kind of what I call it, within the house. But as far as that, I have containers in my life that, really try to engage them, go on walks with them, go to the community swimming pool, a bunch of these other things that are around. But when my wife goes out of town for about 3 or 4 days, my kids get a little feral. They start to grow tusks. They get real sticky. And it's one of those things of exactly what you're saying, from the mindset of like being the primary driver in the home, or at least in that capacity. So it's fascinating to hear about, and it's something that I'm going to reflect on deeply on my perspective, if I'm showing up in all the ways that I need to be showing up, especially with the time that I have for them to make those memories. So thanks for
To
that.
me, the interesting part is just like sending your wife on a trip on her own and just stepping into the role naturally, maybe not as a permanent role, but just
Yeah.
understanding and giving your wife that space. But then understanding that, I think this is important, is that we're not just one-dimensional men. When you realize that you can guide a 4-year-old daughter through her emotional storm just as well as you can guide a boardroom through their struggle, then you just realize you have more of a depth to yourself to be able to expand in all the different areas of your life. Like guiding a daughter through a storm of emotions, whatever maybe the emotions are, that is just as important of a skill to have as what you do at work. And it just makes you a more well-rounded individual. And a lot of men don't have that depth and experience to go into those different areas because we don't have that, like, just that comfortness to it. But as a
Yeah.
dad, you have that unique ability to become a well-rounded person. And when you become that well-rounded person, you can be a lot of different things for people. And a lot of men, this is something we often get so stuck on, is we're told to be one-dimensional. We're going off into the world, just get your job, kind of leave it to beaver. You go out in the world, you come back, you can read your newspaper, and the wife's making dinner, and everything's taken care of. That world isn't the one that gets men to be that full version of themselves. And I always like to describe integrity this way, of breaking it down with the root word of integer. And integer in mathematics is a whole number. It's not fractioned. And in order for a man to live a whole life, he has to be able to reveal himself wholly. And if you're hiding a portion of yourself, if there's a portion that scares you as a dad because you didn't have a good dad, or how can I be a good dad if I've never actually seen what a good dad looks like, that person that sits in the shadow with that thought is the one that's going to help you or prevent you from being that full integer, that full whole person. And when you become that full whole person, living your entire self in the light, you understand all these different areas of your life. Then you can you're getting into a juicy area of your life where you can tap into something and dream and build something and take your family to like an emotional destination that you actually probably can't even fathom. But you've got to be able to live that whole life. And if you're leaving that one component off of like, yes, I can do all the different things that my wife does, you're actually not kind of creating that wholeness that a lot of men want, but they don't really understand. And a lot of that can come from just showing up and being a good dad.
Absolutely. And, Ben, I'm certainly on my journey here. Is why I gravitate for folks like Larry, folks like you. And then also a lot of times when I have men who I know are fathers on the podcast, I love getting their perspective on how they balance work and life, how they parent, how, just the interesting stories that come up from that. So deeply appreciate your perspective there, and some things to think on. As I was doing my research and preparing for this podcast with you, one thing really stood out to me, and I wanted to unpack that a little bit, which is the concept of scream-free parenting. And so this has come up in some of the things that you've done here in the past. I think that for some parents, and I think I'll even reflect early on, I don't really yell at my kids anymore, at least for the last 2 or 3 years. But I do have some, I can be a pretty intense person when I want something to get done a certain way. So help me learn, help me understand this concept of scream-free parenting. What does it mean, and what can we kind of pull from it?
So the first thing to make sure that everyone listening is that it's not screen free, like the actual iPad free. It's actually like screaming and yelling.
Yep.
So the idea comes from Hal Runkle, which is some training that I went through this year to be certified within the scream free parenting world. And I found his book, I think December of last year, and it just deeply resonated with me because it talks about it within this parenting idea, but at the same time, Scream free is actually something that comes from within. The best part of this whole process that he talks about within Scream Free is it's pretty much everything you have control over. It talks about how we're not raising kids, we're raising adults. But we often never really treat the process that way. We treat them and try to take away, like, free will is a good example. Like, you get pissed, like, why did God give kids free will? Because it just makes it difficult. But as adults, you need free will. So as a parent, you have to be able to help them understand how free will is useful, how it's actually, you can have opinions, and I value them as your dad. And that's not something we can easily get to if we just get caught up into do what I was told. And so the easiest part to break down Scream Free is it's a real process of growing up. Most people, and you can think of people in the workplace that yell or scream or just act like little kids, that process of growing up is the one thing that most people never really did, either through lack of a good father, lack of good parenting, or maybe we just felt stuck at a certain age and we never had that maturity moment where we grew up into this higher level of thinking and thinking rationally like an adult versus this emotional child inside that maybe is still screaming at something. And screaming doesn't have to be yelling. There can be screaming like through nonverbal communication, through body language. So you can scream in a lot of different ways. And a lot of this also applies to scream-free marriage. There's all the different principles apply from parenting into marriage because you also can scream in your marriage in a lot of different ways. And the process is the same. Learning to calm down, figure out like what really is yelling on the inside, figuring out what needs to grow up through that, and learning to grow up through it and figure out like how can I represent myself in this moment to my child as what a great adult looks like. And that is really the trick that I've read a lot of parenting books, a lot of looking for that one method that is going to solve that one area. And really, that's not the right mindset. The right mindset is really about how do you calm yourself down to this non-reactionary person that they learn to trust that as they're reacting, going off the hinges, that the one thing they can trust is that you're not. That what they're going through doesn't scare you. That what they're going through doesn't really trigger any stories within yourself to make you feel insecure. And a lot of what we do end up yelling at is really an inner story that hasn't really grown up. And so we always need to look for that inner story to add that illumination to so we can grow up through it and help our kids go from kids to adults, because that is the objective. We're raising adults, not kids. Very few of our parenting exercises actually have that kind of methodology applied to it.
Yeah, and I certainly hear some parallels with, I've always talked to my kids or treated them as if they were future adults. But my depth and understanding of, all the different tactics and tools probably missing here. So I appreciate you expanding on that. And then, again, we can always get better. We always got to learn. So I'm excited. And I hope the listeners are excited as well to kind of look into that scream-free parenting. As we unpack this a little bit further, man, your coaching has taken off, and specifically, like, talk to me a little bit about how you structure your program, and maybe reflect a little bit on some of the value that you've been able to add to individuals who have seeked you out.
So what I originally set my program to do is take my life lessons over 6 years and built it into an 8-week program that is combined with my coaching and some different content I delivered through those 8 weeks. And it was really just kind of me, like, what are these life lessons? What categories of lessons did I have to learn? In what order would they have really changed my life, say, 6 years ago? So I'm my own avatar when I think of my coaching clients. Like, what did I really need? What would have been a game changer of information had I had it at some age of, say, 30 when I had that midlife crisis? And that's essentially what I've taken the program to. And so what I've first part of it, and the way I break it down, is kind of like a GPS. That what I had wrong in the beginning was it's easy to get excited about a destination. You read a book and you're like, man, this person's selling the Shangri-La at this book. But if you don't, in order for a GPS to work, you have to know the start and ending. And if you don't really understand where you are, you can't really set the coordinates correctly to get where you want to go. And so every time I would try to get where I'd want to go, I would always self-sabotage and always end up right back where I wanted. Somehow it was this giant vicious circle. And so within the coaching process, we spend the first 2 weeks getting an exact pinpoint destination of where you are, like physically with that GPS coordinate of where you are. And then we spend the next few weeks deciding where you need to go, setting that legacy up, like what do you want to leave behind? What do you want to be known for? But then the component that needs to be mixed within all of that is this idea of tribe. And something you already know is like who you know is going to help you get where you want to go. And that was something I didn't have in my world as well. And it helped, something that Larry helped me understand, is when you surround yourself with the right hungry men, you can then see things and they can help you get to places that you normally didn't know you could get to. So it's kind of building those life blocks up to that dad that really doesn't have the confidence to start, and then helping them understand these different tools. We spend a week on the scream-free marriage, a week on scream-free parenting, but really understanding what does it look like to be you. Like so many men get caught up in being human doings, but they don't really know what it looks like to be a human being. And it either can come from our father not helping us understand what being looked like, or not having that confidence breathed into us in our early ages, or maybe not having a dad at all, especially for men. That if we didn't have that fatherhood influence to help breathe oxygen into our own internal furnace, to help understand where we could go and what we could do, we often just get stuck. I've talked to so many dads, and when I talk to them, sometimes I get this vibe that I'm like, you ever felt like you're a 10-year-old boy just waiting to be led by your father? And sometimes they're like 35, and they'll be like, damn, I hit it right on the head. Like literally emotionally, talking about growing up. If they're married, they're often yelling like a 10-year-old boy waiting and pissed that his dad hasn't showed up to show him how life's supposed to work. And essentially what I help do is understand those basic building blocks of what a father can give you, even at any age of life, and understanding what you can do when you have those building blocks, and then helping them go out in the world and create it.
I love it, man. And I think it's so important to reflect on the proximity that you just brought up, that tribe, that being around people. I talk about this on the podcast. I went through something called the Modern Day Night Project, put on by Bedros Keuilian and a gang of high level Navy SEALs, Marines, et cetera, to help me level up and see some things that I had not experienced in my life. And it was a big catalyst for me. But what I find is on that journey, I do have an appetite to be around people who are reflecting on themselves, that are positive but critical of themselves and trying to learn more, trying to be more and do more. And so, you brought up Larry Hagner a couple of times. Full transparency, like I recently joined the Dad Edge Alliance, and his mastermind group of people. I'll be on weekly calls. I'll be listening in. I'll be trying to learn from other guys. Unfortunately, I have a standing call right now on Wednesdays. I know you lead one of those calls, Ben. So I was looking at getting on yours, but maybe talk to me a little bit about how you found that group, and then more specifically about how you found kind of a leadership role within it to lead some of these calls.
It kind of comes back to that word friendship that I was talking about. Like that's really like those men started showing me that I was more than I could see. But how I found Larry is an interesting story. So like the first podcast I started listening to was Zig Ziglar. And then John Lee Dumas was on Zig Ziglar. And so I was like, wow, this guy's really got a good message here. So I started listening to John Lee Dumas's podcast, and I was like, man, these guys are killing it. This whole idea of entrepreneurship is awesome. Like most people, when they hear an online entrepreneur, they're like, this sounds like unicorns and rainbows. This is exactly what I want. One of those podcasts was Larry Hagner. And I was like, man, this guy sounds like the brother I've never had. He's thinking and saying some of the things that like I wish I had more of in my life. So I started listening to his podcast. And then I joined his Facebook group, and then I started helping dads in there. Even before I even really knew how to help dads, I was just giving my own internal advice for it. And essentially I got hit up on the Facebook group as the radar of like contributing a lot. And so then Larry reached out like, hey, you want to have a conversation? I was like, the voice from the radio wants to have a conversation with me? Like, I'm a nobody. Like, why would he want to do that? And so we talked about this, and he was launching a mastermind at the time before the alliance even happened. And I remember describing this feeling of like, that I was always very empathetic and feeling other people's emotions, but then once I felt them, they would be stuck. I remember telling Larry, I was like, I feel like a sponge. Once people feel it and say it, then I suck it in, and I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to separate my stuff from their stuff. And that mastermind helped me just kind of understand when you get into a group of 10 guys and be vulnerable of what you could do. And then shortly after, we launched the alliance, and that just kind of, I still didn't necessarily engage fully in the alliance. It was still kind of a place to be hungry. It was still kind of, I didn't fully believe is a word I would add that I didn't fully have in there, that they see something in me yet, but I don't fully see it myself. And that believe word is something that a dad can do, a father can do for his kids. But if you don't have that version and dad breathing that believe word into you, and so growing up on a farm, my dad defined his life by the work he did, not by the words he said. And so I didn't always understand how that always translated. And I didn't have that word believe. So until I started believing I could be more, and launching my podcast, almost even before I believed it, I'm like, I'm going to launch this and let the internet tell me if anything is good. But then as I started doing it, they started doing that, and I was like, okay, I think I'm starting to figure something out. And that all belief kind of kept diving into. And then once I lost my job, the opportunity opened up to lead a call team. And it just worked out that he had a call team open. And we always were good friends and we were always supporting each other. And we've even joined different conferences together. And so we've always had a good relationship. And the door opened up and I jumped into it. And that call team has also helped me understand. That was even before I had my coaching program. It kind of cemented the believe word because these dads would repeat stuff in other parts of the groups and they would try to repeat what I said. And I'm like, wow, people are really taking notes with things that I said. And it really just helped validate what I was doing and what I could do for other dads. And I just had to step into that belief even more to really launch my coaching business.
I love it, man. I appreciate you sharing that as well. So, hey, as we're rounding out the call here, let's talk a little bit about your podcast. Like you've got a couple things going on. So let's unpack that clearly. Let's tell people where to find it. And then also tell people where they can easily find you, Ben.
So the first podcast is Military Veteran Dad. The website is Military Veteran Dad. It's a 2-episode show a week, and it's been going over for 2.5 years. So there's lots of great content there for military veterans. If you're listening for coming home, how to reconnect in the military, how to understand and navigate transition, pretty much every topic I've gone into. And recently we just did an episode on PTSD, and I set the record for the longest and the most swearing in an episode. And that episode really has resonated and kind of broke me open, even I would say. Like it broke me as well, because now I kind of am a little more unhinged with what I say. I'm a little less guarded in what I say. So it's also like the internet has responded as well. Like I can't tell you how many times I get more responses now out of the people just pitching stuff since that episode started launching. So that podcast is Military Veteran Dad. And what I learned and what I felt like I was kind of hungry for, it started with a bike ride last summer. I was on a bike ride and it hit me. I was like, you know what? I could launch a daily stay-at-home dad podcast. I think that would work. I think there's something a lot of stay-at-home dads get stuck in is finding that purpose. And we kind of just becomes like for lack of a better term and a worse term, like a babysitter. We don't really understand how to navigate the world of being a father and a provider, or in the provider and within the home. And I was like, I think I could do something. I'm like, well, there's not really a market. I don't really want to start another project just for the sake of starting another project. So I just kind of baked it and didn't do anything with it. And then January comes around, and this idea for the business of fatherhood kind of came to me. I was like, it would be the expanded version of like Military Dad, but I didn't really do anything with it yet. And so then like April came around, I'm launching my business, I'm getting clients into it. And I'm like, I think I need to do this because the stories are getting more punchy. The advice is there. And I think it would really help other dads that are in corporate America that are human doings and need to find that being component, but then no one's really giving them the words to do it. And so then I decided, I'm like, I'm going to launch a daily not stay-at-home dad podcast, but a business-related podcast, but fatherhood-related at the same time. So the Business of Fatherhood is a 5-day-a-week daily podcast, short 2 to 5 minute episodes on just different stories from my life, different pieces of wisdom that I put together, accumulated information, lots of different things that I cover on there. And that podcast can be found at the Business of Fatherhood on any podcast player. And that website is at benkilloy.com.
I love it, man. Absolutely. And then is that the best place to go out and find you, benkilloy.com, active on social, and what's your favorite platform?
Instagram is the best social platform. There I'm at Ben_Killoy.
Oh, fantastic.
And an open book, ask me questions. There's like I wear my heart in my sleeve, and like anything you really need to ask me, or if this is a heavy moment, something I said resonated and you need to share something, don't hesitate to reach out, because I am a big believer, like the one thing that transformed my life repeatedly over and over, and you probably have seen this as well, that you're always one conversation away from changing your life. And the hello is the most underrated tool in the human experience, because that hello can literally open a door to a world you don't even know exists. And once you know it exists, then you can enter that door and you can actually take the information and start going towards it. But I've sat on plane rides with Marine officers, and I could have sat on the plane ride never knowing they were Marine and missed out on the entire opportunity to talk to them. And I said hello to them, and we had a great 3-hour conversation. But if I didn't say hello, I would have missed out on that whole experience. Like, so I can tell you so many different moments where just a simple hello, nothing happened from it, but I'm a richer person based on the conversation that I had on the other side of that. So like that to me is like the core thing that I have preached over and over. And the part that we were talking about, going back to the tribe, that really most dads really don't realize. And if you're in the self-help, you might have heard the quote, you're the average of 5 closest people in your life. But a lot of people that aren't in it don't really know that. Until you understand how your average is shaping your thinking and your possibilities and your opportunities, you're really not going to be able to change your life and break free from that, because those are going to be your orbit, and that is going to create the gravity that holds you where you are. but you need to be able to change that average and finding new hellos and going different places and saying hello to new strangers. Like that's the best way to change your life.
I love it, man. And that's, even the logo for this podcast, the Herkinator that I've got, as kind of the thumbnail. I refer to that often as my Deus ex machina, my God from the machine, that one piece of information that you might come up across in order to change your perspective and the way that you view the world, whether that be, through the lens of the modern day technology world, or through the deep thinking Stoics, or similar type of content. So, you, sir, are an honor to have on the podcast. I deeply value your perspective and the insights that you shared today. And I want to thank you for coming on. And I'm looking forward to the next time that I ask you to stop by the podcast to share how things are going and to reflect in this way, man.
I appreciate you, Jake, and I appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation. And hopefully, someone listening out there allows it them to change your life and to see something new possible for their life, especially within fatherhood.
All right, brother. Hey, well, you take care out there in Wisconsin. We'll talk soon.